Everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome and thank you all for being here today. Before we begin, I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the wonderful volunteers who made this ceremony possible. To William Kennis for organizing the whole event. Your dedication brought today together. And to Ricky for filming and maintaining the website and the YouTube channel, and so for preserving these memories for future generations. To Mark for sharing the historical background of the family with such details, and to Wim for placing the Stolperstein with such care. To many others who supported this event with thoughtfulness and sensitivity. Hartelijk bedankt.
Bravo, bravo, bravo.
We gather here today, family, friends, and citizens of the city of Antwerp, across generations and from around the world, from Israel, from the United States, London, Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, and of course from Brussels, and of course from Antwerp. We've come together to honor the memory of 19 of our family members who were murdered in the Holocaust. Today we walk not just through the streets of this city, but along the path of memory. At 5 locations, we'll place Stolpersteine in front of homes where our loved ones once lived, laughed, dreamed, and from where they were taken. These small copper stones are markers of presence. They invite the world to stop, see, and remember. Here we stand in front of the house where my grandparents, Abusch Führer and Cilka Bergmann, and my uncle Jacob Führer once lived. Although I grew up just a few minutes from here, I never knew that my grandparents had lived here. I never knew I had uncles, aunts, and cousins here. My father never spoke their name, never mentioned them. And this is the first time there is a haskara, a commemoration in their honor. So let us begin. Dr. Noa Shashar, our historian, will share a brief history of our Reinhold Führer family. Then Sonny, my dear cousin Sonny, will speak about our grandparents, followed by Rosa Boyd, 4th generation. She will be remembered my father's brother, Jacob Führer. Dominique Schiff will then sing a Yiddish song in the air of those times, and we will close the ceremony by saying all together Kaddish in honor of Abusch Führer, Cilka Bergmann, and Jacob Führer. Noa, please.
Hello. Our grand and great-grandfather, Abusch Führer Reinhold, was born in Gorlitze in 1878. He married Cilka Bergmann, born in Częstochowice in 1877, in 1904. And within the subsequent 6 years, the young couple, who ran an inn, gave birth to 4 children: Mariam Hinda, Shimon, Moshe Mendel, and Esther Judith, known in the family as Erna. When the local government introduced discriminatory regulations forbidding Jews to sell alcohol, Abusch and Cilka, like many Galician Jews, decided to seek a better future. Abusch arrived in Antwerp on June 21, 1910. Cilka and the 4 children, now aged 5, 5.5, 4, 1.5, and 6 months, emigrated to Belgium 16 months later. Closer. Upon his arrival, Abusch lived in Berchem and learned the diamond polishing trade. His residence apparently wasn't suitable for the large family, and when Cilka and the children arrived, the family found shelter in Provinciestraat number 212, today next to Kleinblatt Bakery. Mariam Hinda, now 6, was perhaps sent to school. Shimon, like most boys his age, was probably sent to the Yisoide HaTorah Cheder. And maybe even 3-year-old Moshe Mendel attended the community Cheder for little ones. Little Esther Judith surely spent her mornings in Cilka's company. Perhaps the new apartment was too expensive, or maybe it no longer met the family needs. Either way, in February 1912, around the time Jacques was born, the Führer Reinhold family moved to a more distant location. In their new dwelling, which was surely not luxurious, the family stayed only a short time, and during the next 2 years, they were registered at 2 additional addresses. Imagine Abusch and Cilka's first decade as a couple. 6 children, immigration to an unknown land, frequent relocations, wandering Jews. World War I erupted when Moshe Mendel was supposed to enter 1st grade. On August 3, 1914, the German army invaded Belgium, and overnight, the country became a battlefield. People like Abusch and Cilka, considered by the Belgians as Austrians who belonged to the enemy nation, were required to leave Belgium within a day. Thus, about 1.5 million refugees, including many Jews, fled toward the border crossing. How do young children feel when everything around them collapses? I think about my grandfather, Moshe Mendel. His excitement about entering school was surely replaced by great confusion. Abusch and Cilka made their way back to Gorlitze, where their parents and siblings still lived. Once again, they found themselves moving from country to country, this time with 6 children, the eldest being 9. But in Gorlitze, which before the war had experienced growth and development, tranquility didn't last long. Russian forces invaded the city, spreading panic everywhere, and the town became a front line. Abusch, like about 320,000 Jewish men under 50, was drafted into the Austro-Hungarian army, while Cilka was left alone again, this time with 6 children. When the war ended, there was fear that Abusch would be drafted again, this time into the Polish army, which had into the army of Poland, which had regained independence, and the family had to flee again through Czechoslovakia to Germany. In Frankfurt, where they arrived in around 1920, there was a vibrant community. But there too, our grandparents, aunts and uncles were considered foreigners, Ostjuden, and lived in poverty. The elder boys attended the yeshiva and also worked, I assume that Miriam Hinda and Erna worked as well. In early January 1924, Abusch returned to Antwerp alone. This time, upon arriving in a diamond city, he held a Polish passport issued in Berlin in 1923, but practically speaking, exchanging his Austro-Hungarian citizenship for a Polish one didn't improve his situation. He was still considered a foreigner. At least he was familiar with the Jewish area of Antwerp, which he had left 10 years earlier. In the local diamond industry, there were now more workers, and many cutting and polishing workshops were set up in apartments and on rooftops, employing Jews like Abusch. A document from September 1924 testifies to the arrival of Cilka and 4 of her children in Antwerp. Shimon and Moshe remained in Frankfurt, either to work or to study, and returned to Belgium only about a year later. In the next 15 years, our family members lived in 3 different apartments. Now, Abusch and Cilka were parents to grown young men and women, and to teenagers, the youngest of whom, Rosa, was already 11. They surely hoped that this time they would be able to establish a long-term existence in the Belgium city. Looking back many years later, Moshe and Rosa told their children that during this period, their parents' home was poor but open and happy. Cilka was good-natured and welcomed guests warmly, and the young friends of the 6 children loved to visit the house. Gradually, the lives of the Führer Reinholds entered a tranquil course, and during those years, some of them who were living here at Zurenburgstraat 14, the last address of Abusch and Cilka's in Antwerp, they experienced many joyful moments. My beloved mother, Estelle, one of Abusch and Cilka's grandchildren, was told by her father that she loved sitting on Abusch's lap and playing with his beard. And as a grandmother myself, I often think about those great-grandparents of ours who at the beginning of their 7th decade lived surrounded by their 6 children and 6 grandchildren. And then the war broke out.
Thank you, Noa. You've clearly done a vast amount of research and have disclosed some information that I'm not entirely familiar with. I can only speak from what I heard from my mother. Representatives of the city of Antwerp, dear cousins, family and extended family. This is a bitter-sweet occasion. Bitter because we remind ourselves of the departed who once lived here and of their terrible end. Sweet because despite what happened to them, so many of the descendants have come here today, most of us from really far away, to remember and to memorialize grandparents, uncles, aunts and cousins who were cruelly deported from this place, places nearby, in 1942, 82 years ago. My mother and one brother were the only survivors of their family who lived in the house by which I now stand. Their parents, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, spouses and 5 young children were all taken from this house and others nearby in September 1942, as it happens the month, probably the week, possibly even within a day or 2 of my birth in a small town to which my parents had been evacuated from the bombing of London in England. They were transported from here to Meshulam and shortly thereafter by train to a place called Oświęcim, a small town in Poland which had a significant Jewish community and where my mother told us that we had relatives. A town, Oświęcim, which the Germans called Auschwitz, and they were murdered there. I said we've come to remember, but we do not remember any of our family whose names are inscribed in these metal stones because we never knew them. Over the course of many years, my mother did tell us their names, but otherwise told us very little about them. And when thinking in advance about this event today, somewhat to my surprise, I did remember just a few things that I heard from my mother. I heard that our grandparents were typical, traditional Polish Galician Jews, evident by their dress and their language. Our grandfather was a follower of the Rebbe of Bobov Chusid, and was a good Baltfiller, my mother boasted, who led the davening, the prayers in the Hasidic style of Bobov. And our grandmother, she told us, was rather meticulous in maintaining traditions. Mum took pride in telling us that unlike many other Hasidim, her father did not travel to be with the Rebbe over Yontif, but stayed home with his family. Mum also told us, and Noah's referred to this, that when her parents married, their respective parents sought to ensure that they would have a living by setting them up with a kretschmer. Noah called it an inn, I, coming from England, call it a licensed pub. However, shortly after their marriage, the government in Poland passed laws depriving Jews specifically of the right to a pub, right to sell alcohol, and because of this, they sought to leave Poland and they came to Antwerp. The names of the places from which they came were and are familiar to me. Golitz, as they pronounce it, Bobov, Cienskiewicz, which Mum told us was very near to Bobov. At some stage she told us that her father was enlisted in the Austrian army. As a result, consequences following that, she and her mother, and I'm not sure if any other siblings, had to travel from place to place, including in Czechoslovakia, surprisingly. And her mother had to go out and work, to find work, just to be able to find food for them. Later on, Mum told me, and she was quite proud of this, that also somehow related to problems with army service, they moved to Frankfurt. Mum told us that her first schooling and learning, in that case German and Hebrew, was while they lived in Frankfurt. The upshot of all this, and Noah has described it in far greater detail, was, as Shaul referred to the other evening, schwer zu sein Ayid. It was really very, very difficult. I've long been struck by the irony. They emigrated to escape discrimination and worse in Poland, and immigrated to Belgium, an enlightened country that welcomed many Jewish immigrants, and yet it was from here that they were deported to be murdered in Poland. In my childhood and youth, years after the war, we visited Antwerp on many occasions. They were not always, for me, happy occasions. And after Flora and I married, on many more occasions we came to Antwerp, but we never ever came here to this place and the other places where my mother and her family had lived. And I remember my mother telling me and my sister, Alea Shalom, that since leaving Antwerp in 1940, she had never been back to this place, and she was determined and said she would never ever come here. It was difficult to understand why she took that attitude. But thinking about it, I then recalled that when I was about 9 or 10 years old, when we were on a holiday in Knokke, and I played on the beach with some local Antwerp children with whom I was able to converse only in Yiddish, I once asked my mother, how come some of those boys had grandparents and I did not? Her reaction haunted me for a long time, because hearing my question, she burst out crying and managed only to sputter that they were killed in the war. Remembering this, I think I understand why she never told us much about her family and why she never came back to this house. the memories of the loss were too painful. And that reminds us of what happened here. Ordinary people living family life in this city that had been open to Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe, mostly from Poland, were deemed in 1940, deemed not just by the Nazis to be worthy of nothing other than extermination for no other reason than they were Jewish. So they were deported, along with thousands of other Jews from this city and this country, to Poland, where they were done to death. In contrast, I remember hearing from my mother that she had a relatively pleasant childhood in Belgium. She spoke Flemish at school, and I remember in London with friends who had been with her in school here in Antwerp and who had likewise managed to make their way to London as refugees. And she spoke Flemish quite frequently, but she also expressed a regret and almost a bitterness at times that she had never obtained Belgian citizenship, notwithstanding that she was actually born here. So this event today brings back memories, but not of our grandparents and members of our family who lived in these houses because we did not know them. In effect, we were deprived of the privilege and the pleasure of knowing and growing up with grandparents and an extended family. A few weeks ago, we read Parshat Zachor, which instructs us not to forget what befell our people when, escaping from tyranny, weak and defenseless, they were attacked by Amalek. Our grandparents were weak and defenseless when they were deported from here. And my dear cousins have taken the initiative to ensure that they are not forgotten. With the helpful cooperation of the city of Antwerp, and especially with the dedicated work of the volunteers whom we were privileged to meet yesterday and to express our heartfelt thanks for their efforts, the stones that are now embedded, and have been embedded by this house, the house that they lived in, will be a permanent reminder of them and of what happened to them and what happened also to so many others. We have no graves to visit, so these stones will commemorate them, and I'm grateful to my cousins and to the Antwerp authorities and volunteers who made this possible. Thank you.
Hi everybody. Is it okay if I just hold it? I'm Rosa from London. I'm the daughter of Zahavet, who was the daughter of Esti, who was the daughter of my great-grandma Rosa, for whom I'm named. Jacob Führer was her brother, which makes him my great-grand-uncle. Jacob was born on February the 14th, 1912. He was one of 6 siblings. His family moved here to Antwerp in 1923 after some difficult years following the First World War. We hardly know anything about him. Jacob was deported to Auschwitz with his parents on Transport 9, September 29th, 1942. He would have been 30. I've heard a few stories about what happened to him. To the best of my knowledge, it's all conjecture and we're not really sure. There's a story that Grandma Rosa met somebody in Knokke after the war who said that Jacob had survived in the camp almost to the end. I don't know if we've ever seen documents that prove this to be true. There's another story, a difficult one, that suggests he might have come to London around the same time as my great-grandparents, before perhaps returning here. We also don't know if that's true. Apparently, Grandma Rosa thought that he had perhaps been conscripted in the Polish army, and that was why nobody knew where he was. So I don't really know what happened to Jacob, but I know that great-grandma Rosa, his sister, older than him by just 1 year, waited for him. For years after the war, there wasn't any evidence of his death, so she waited and believed that he might return, but he never did. Sonny told me yesterday that she got the Red Cross to investigate, but never got anything from that either. There's so much of this story that I'm lucky enough to not really be able to imagine. I can't imagine the fear and suffering and persecution and loss that marked their lives. Because of this, I find it hard to know exactly what to make of my mourning for Jacob, and I know so little about him other than that his life was too short. But though I can't relate to most of Jacob's story, whilst writing this speech, I found myself thinking a lot about his sibling relationships. I have younger brothers, so I imagine that Jacob and his older sister Rosa and their other siblings played together as children and maybe argued a bit and talked about their parents behind their backs when they were teenagers. Maybe Rosa found Jacob quite annoying when they were growing up. Maybe they were best friends. I know that they were close. So both. I can't comprehend how it felt for her, not knowing what happened to her younger brother. But I can imagine what it felt like to have one. So I know that her longing and concern for him would have marked her whole life. I stand before you today because Rosa and Ella made it safely to London. Jacob didn't, and he never had the chance to have a family. So he lives on in us.
My song, a man is walking in a city, maybe Antwerp, maybe Prague, maybe Warsaw, but he suddenly hears a melody, and this melody he didn't hear it for 20 years, maybe 30 years. So he goes towards the music, and when he arrives in front of the musicians, he takes money out of his pocket and he gives the note to the musicians and he tells them, change my note for coins of 3 and play this music again. And he closes his eyes and immediately he's in his childhood house, he's in the kitchen and his mother is cooking tzimmes and he can even smell it. But the music stops. So he takes another note out of his pocket and he said to the musicians, please change this note for coins of 4 and play it again. And again he closes his eyes and he's in his childhood house room and he hears his mother climbing up the stairs to say good night to him and to sing this song to him. And he can even smell her perfume. But the music stops again and he says, he takes another note and he says, he gives it to the musicians and he says, please play it again and again and I beg you, take all your time. Oops. Yeah. Je suis trop émue. Sorry.
Respire.
Bei Cheel 25er. Bei Cheel 25er. So, spiel schon mir, les morgen. Ali de la taille, bei Cheel ist 25er, auf Samotne 4, spielt schon mir, les morgen, du selbige wie früher. Bei Cheel ist 25er, auf Samotne 10, spielt schon mir, les morgen, du selbige noch schöne.
Kaddish. Iskadal Iskadash Shmei Labo. Be'olma di Birachil Usei Amlich Malchusei V'yatzmach Pur Konei V'korei Mishichei. V'chayei Choin V'yoyim Choin V'chayei Dechol Beis Yisrael Ba'agolo V'zman Korei V'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabo Mevorach Le'olam Le'olmei Umayo. Isparach Yehei Shmei Rabo Mevorach Le'olam Le'olmayo. Isparach Ishtabach Isparach Yisroimam Yisnasei. Yishadol Yishalel Yishadol Shalei Shabrech. إلا من قول خسار شراسات خسار خمسات عميران بأوما بأمر ومين يعيش لهم رب من شمايا وخاين طيب علينا والكل إسرائيل من ومين ويسير الشرائع بمنار ويعسير الشرائع علينا والكل إسرائيل